And hello, one and all. So glad that you've decided to join us for a brand new episode of the Behind the Mic podcast. This week featuring ESPN's Mike Couzens, one of the best young announcers in the game as we speak. He's just 33 years old. He's done so much already, and really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to him about his lead up to this moment in his career. Of course, he's got a long career left in front of him at just 33 years old, but he's done so much already, specifically in the game of baseball, in the baseball world. We talk a lot about that. And of course, baseball's in a weird place, kind of. If you pay attention to TV ratings, you know that the All Star game just had one of its lowest ratings ever, and the sky is falling for some people in the baseball world. But there's no doubt baseball is still the place to go if you want to hear really good announcers and you want to hear them not only call a good game but also storytell. Baseball is always the place to go for that, and it always will be the place to go for that. And we talk a little bit about that. Obviously, Mike has done plenty of college baseball. He's done some college softball the last couple of years. We talk about that as well, including Major League Baseball. He does other sports as well. He went to Syracuse, which is the mecca of universities for sports broadcasting. We talk about that as well. If you haven't checked out the first 3 episodes of the Behind the Mic podcast, be sure to do that. Episode 1 with Tom Hart, Episode 2 with John Forsland, and Episode 3 last week with Alan Bestwick. And this week, an episode with Mike Couzens, which we'll get into now. Hope you enjoy it. And we are joined now on the Behind the Mic podcast with Mike Couzens from ESPN and ESPN Radio. Thank you so much for joining me, Mike. Happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
So I want to ask you first. I've been dying to ask someone this question. So I'm going to ask you, let's see. Marv Albert, Dave Pasch, Ian Eagle, Bob Costas, Mike Tirico, all come from Syracuse. You come from Syracuse. What makes Syracuse the capital of sports broadcasting?
Well, first, I think it starts with opportunity in that, the radio station that comes to mind first and foremost at Syracuse is WAER. There's also another one, which is an entirely student-run station, WJPZ, which is known as Z89. There's a newspaper, there's a TV station. So there's lots of opportunity to get involved with broadcasting. So that's one part of it. The other part is I think there's really healthy competition within those stations that everybody helps each other get better. And we would do every week a meeting at the end of the week to review all of our broadcasts, what went well, what didn't. We'd critique each other's play-by-play, each other's feature storytelling. And so I think that has been immensely helpful for me then, and it's still immensely helpful for me now with the guys who I was in college with, and we'll share feedback with each other and what works and what doesn't work. And so I think that having people who are at the same stage as you in life and in broadcasting and who have similar goals, and it's not as though you're vying for just one position, because we rotate through who does play-by-play, who is in the studio hosting, who does analysis, who runs the board. There was no monopoly on anything, so everybody knew that their chance would eventually come around. And I think that's what helped and has helped a lot of people be successful coming out of Syracuse.
I knew I would leave out names because there's so many. Dick Stockton, a legend. Sean McDonough, who just called the Stanley Cup final. I think I mentioned Mike Tirico. Anish Shroff, who is now the voice of the Carolina Panthers. Scott Hansen, who everyone watches for hours upon hours on Sundays. So, I mean, Syracuse has built these legends, and you are one of those names. I'm sure that has to be a special feeling.
It's really nice to know that you have a lot of company with people who share your roots. And so even if you've never met somebody before, which a lot of those people I've never met, and some I've been very fortunate to meet and get to know throughout the course of my career, you know that your story more or less started at the same place, and you remember being in the same building. Although for some of us, it wasn't the case. When Bob Costas was in school, WAER was in a Quonset hut, and now it's in I believe it's a former dormitory. But you have the same shared traditions, and that's really fun. And it's great to have people to know that you can look up to and that hopefully you can call colleagues one day if you're lucky enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So those were just great names that have come from Syracuse. Some of the great names in this broadcasting industry. When you were growing up, did you have an idol? Surely you did.
So part of what made me want to get into doing sports broadcasting and play-by-play was spurred by the fact that I did not have cable television growing up, which I hated at the time because there were a lot more cartoons with Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network that I wanted to be watching, but I couldn't. And so I listened to the radio a ton. And that has really stuck with me today, not as much with live AM or FM, but that I would choose a podcast more often over a TV show. That's just, I've always kind of been that way. And so when I was growing up, the thing that I listened to the most was Mets broadcasts on the radio. So it was Bob Murphy, who since passed away, but Howie Rose, who's been with the Mets for more than 20 years, Gary Cohen in the same vein, who started out on the radio with the Mets and now has been the voice on SNY since that channel launched in the late 2000s. So I was really lucky because those are not only two great New York broadcasters, but two great broadcasters in the history of the sport, in my opinion. And so to learn from guys like that, even though I didn't know at the time when I started listening that it was what I wanted to do, to understand the passion that they had. They both grew up Mets fans, which certainly helps that they know the history of the team really well and understand the ups and the downs of it. And, you know, I just remember thinking about, it was a visceral feeling that when a home run was hit off the bat, before they even called it a home run, you could just tell by the way that they inflected in their voices that something special was about to happen. And I knew that I wanted to try and recapture that magic in doing it myself because it makes it part of the experience. Living in Cleveland the last 5 years, Tom Hamilton, who's the lead radio broadcaster for the Guardians, is so good. Another type of guy where when there's a ball that's hit that's going to be a home run, you know, because he really gets into his calls. But really goes back to those guys in New York who I listened to growing up that made it exciting for me that as I got older and older, I cared less about when I went to a Mets game, let's say, what was happening on the field, but I wanted to be watching the guys in the broadcast booth more than anything else.
Yeah, got that. That's the same. I'm the same way. You mentioned you live in Cleveland. How many times have you slipped up on the Guardians? I still can't get it in my mind.
I catch myself. I don't live in Cleveland anymore. I moved down to Charlotte at the end of last year for my wife's job. But yeah, I more often find myself that if I'm going to say the name, I just say Cleveland so that I don't step and trip over it myself. Like with the Washington football team being the Commanders, I still have to think, okay, which of the three team names that are in my head is actually the right one? Is it WFT? Is it their former name? Oh, it's the Commanders. Right. Okay, got it.
Wonder how many people's just going to keep calling them Washington football team throughout the season.
I think it was pretty fun. It's
Yeah.
certainly a unique name. I mean, it's pretty generic, but it was pretty funny to say at least.
Yeah, it was. So you talk about baseball. You've done a lot of baseball, obviously, in your career. There's a sort of romanticism, if you will, about baseball, especially broadcasting it, whether it be TV or radio. What is that in your mind?
Well, for me on radio, which I don't get to do as much anymore because I would say 95% of my schedule is TV. Radio is a fun challenge to step back into every now and then because nothing exists until you say it does. You are creating every image that's there for the listener. And so as a game or a season goes along, especially at the affiliated or the major league level, there's a lot of games, in excess of 140 games, depending on what level you're working. It can be very easy to slip into routines of using the same words over and over again or the same phrases. And so I find the challenge in just describing the small things of, you know, he's got his back right foot on the back line of the batter's box where the chalk has mostly been kicked away and he's got red, white, and blue cleats, and describing the sky and the sunset and the ballparks. You know, when I go to a major league stadium, I was in San Francisco earlier this season, getting to describe the ships that are out there and looking across the bay at Oakland and all those different things that, you know, in a lot of cases are new to me, but I also understand that I'm the conduit for the listener in that instance who may have never been to that ballpark, may never go to that ballpark. And so I want to try and make the experience as descriptive as I can. And that's the fun of it for me, where TV is so much more of an analyst medium. And you don't have to describe all of those things because the viewer can see them. I enjoy the challenge of that because I like language and I like to try and use different words, and to be able to paint that picture for the listener is really fun, in addition to getting to call the game.
It's so funny. So many people that I've talked to, I don't know if it's funny. I could see it. I understand it. I think everyone loves to be on radio. If you were to have them choose, would you rather do radio call or TV call? You'd rather do radio. That's what I've heard from a lot of people. I think I would be the same way. Is that how you are?
I don't have a particular preference one way or the other. I very much appreciate that in my role that I do get to do both, because it would be like if someone said to you, well, you have to eat chocolate cake every day. It's not as exciting anymore, because it's fun when it's a delicacy every once in a while. But if it was in front of you every day, whether it was pizza or cinnamon bun, whatever, all the things that I love to eat, if I got to eat them every day, they wouldn't be fun anymore. And so I like to be able to switch things up. I don't know that I could choose one, because I enjoy the more conversational aspect of being on TV. I enjoy the descriptive aspect of being on radio. And so I'm grateful that I do get to do all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. You do a lot of ACC college basketball, which includes Syracuse. What's it like calling a Syracuse game as a Syracuse graduate?
It's always really fun because a lot of the feedback that you tend to get, especially in the era of widespread social media, is less positive than you would like it to be. And that's fine. That comes with the territory. And I've come to learn that, it's not about me or whomever is sitting in that chair and what we're saying. It's just that if something's not going a fan's way, we're the outlet for that displeasure. So I understand that it's not personal. Calling a Syracuse game is fun because there's a huge alumni community that really supports the basketball program, which historically speaking, and I guess more recently, has been more successful than the football program, which was really good, but several decades ago. And so it's always fun to hear from people who either I went to school with, we were in school around the same time, or who were there maybe, like, we listed off those alums before. It's a big community of people who might have been there decades ago, and they're proud to see another Newhouse alum or another Syracuse alum calling the game. So I like to see the Syracuse community that's out there. And it's fun for me as well, because my freshman year, I was a manager for the team. So getting back to be at the Dome, I remember playing pickup games on that court after the team would practice, and the security guards would kick us out and turn the lights off, and we'd be trying to stay out there as long as possible. So it's always a great chance to reminisce on my college days. And there's always going to be a good crowd at the Carrier Dome too, which is a unique aspect of going there.
Yeah. So this is a sports media podcast, but I'll ask you a sports question. Speaking of the ACC, everyone's talking about conference realignment. What do you make of the total chaos that has been the last couple of weeks, and even going back to Texas and Oklahoma moving to the SEC, which I guess was almost a year ago now, I guess it was announced. What do you make of all of that?
I've basically stopped reading stories about sources say X, Y, and Z could happen, because I think in a given day you could read 5 different scenarios that might play out. And I'm like, all right, well, just somebody let me know when this is all official, because it's very dizzying, and it's a fun exercise in trying to chase a story. Obviously, reporters have to report what they're hearing from people, but until something's official, who knows? It does raise the question for me of the viability of how this all works. I understand it for football or for basketball, but how does it work for soccer or for volleyball? Is UCLA going to be flying across the country for all of their Olympic sports to go play Rutgers or to go play Maryland? I don't know what the sustainability of that is. And there was one thing that I saw thrown out on Twitter, and obviously we know what drives all of this, but if we were to do it in the most logical sense, to group the country into maybe 6 regional conferences, basically the way the conferences started, it would all come full circle. And so you'd have teams in the Northeast, and you'd have teams in the Southeast, and in the Great Plains, and in the West Coast. And I think that makes the most sense, but it's not going to be what happens. So I'm a bystander like most all other people are. And so I'm fascinated by what's happening and just trying to make sense of it all like everybody else, I guess.
You were at the Big Ten Network, right? I have that right, don't I?
I was a freelancer for them before I went full time with ESPN. Yes.
Okay, so with that being said, how I don't know if this is going to make any sense at all. I'm just spewing out things, kind of like what you just said. What would it be like at the Big Ten Network to do something at USC and then a week later something in Indiana and then Rutgers? I mean, That just doesn't make any sense to me. With, like you said, football and basketball, sure, they have the resources, fine. But soccer, softball, Olympic sports, like you said, I just don't know how much sense it makes. What would it be like as an announcer at the Big Ten Network doing all of that in a short period of time?
Well, I suppose it's not terribly different than what we have now, right? Like, does a team playing in Morgantown, West Virginia have any, logical geographical connection to a team in Lubbock, Texas? No, not really. Or in the ACC, with you could go as far north as Boston College all the way down to the University of Miami. Those two teams don't really have any geographical proximity either. So there were times where I said to myself, let's say I don't even know if this has been thrown out. Let's say Oregon or Washington joined the Big 12 and they were playing eventually UCF, right? Like none of that makes sense either, but it's all potentially on the table. And so I think I said to myself a couple of times, wow, the era of geographical conferences is really out the window. It's already been out the window. These are just even more geographically disparate teams. And so I just hope for logic's sake that we stop naming conferences with numbers because we know that things keep changing. How long has the Big 12 been 12 teams? How long has the Big 10 been 10 teams? You I don't know what you would call them, but let's give up the numbers because it doesn't really make sense anymore.
No, it doesn't make any sense, and it certainly probably does not help bring new people in. It's just, if it's too confusing, are new people going to come in and pay attention to it? I don't know. It seems like a big mess to me that will sort out here sometime soon, and then we'll just enjoy the football and the basketball and whatever, and we'll forget about it. But right now, it's a total mess. um, we talk about you doing baseball. You've done some college softball as well. You were part of the NCAA tournament coverage this past year. I think you were in Tallahassee for the regional and super regional Missouri and James Madison. What do you like? What's different between baseball and softball, especially with you up there calling the game?
So the first time that I got to do softball was on kind of an emergency fill-in basis. I was finishing up a road trip where I was calling 3 basketball games, and I was in South Bend, Indiana, and I get a call. It says, "Hey, can you fill in? Beth Mowens has a commitment that she can't make it to the softball game down at the University of Florida," and so it was Florida and Tennessee. And I said, "Well, sure. I've never called a softball game, but I've called baseball, and so I'm sure I can figure it out." And in the booth with me this was the top regular season crew, which was Michelle Smith, a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, and Amanda Scarborough, a 2-time All-American, both pitchers. So the gap of experience could not have been wider between the two of them and me, and they were so gracious welcoming me in. And it has quickly become one of my favorite sports because it's fast-paced, it's exciting, and like you get into the college baseball regionals, there's a very wide gap between the number 1 seed and the number 4 seed in any of the 16 sites. You might have games that end up, I did one a couple weeks ago that was 20-1 in an elimination game because the pitching just dwindles so quickly. I think softball's run rule really has it right. Who's well served by a team winning 20-1 because you're depleting your bullpen. The team that wins that game then has to move on and keep playing. And ultimately, all of this is on TV and entertainment product. So what's entertaining about a 19-run deficit in a game? Like, let's pack it up, move on, and let's hope that everybody's in great shape for the next game. What I also really appreciate, too, about softball from the players and the coaches and the administrators is that everybody is so welcoming, and they're so happy that we're there covering the sport. They want to help us tell their stories. You don't always get that because of the saturation of media coverage in power conference football, power conference basketball. It's been there, done that, and the exposure is several decades ahead of where softball is, which fortunately, thanks to ESPN's commitment to it, keeps growing. We went from a couple of years ago televising about 600 games to this year, I believe the number was more than 2,000, and doing every pitch of the postseason and all the way into the championship series of the College World Series. So I really have loved it. I work with great people. The teams are great. The games are exciting, and I love it. And I'm fortunate to be a part of it. And so I've loved it this year, actually. So I started out in Tallahassee, where Florida State, which won the College World Series in 2018, was eliminated. They were the number 2 national seed. That was a huge upset. And the super regional you mentioned, that was the one I had done last year. So I got to go out to Tempe, Arizona this year and see Northwestern, take on Arizona State, and Northwestern, which hadn't been to the College World Series since 2007, upset Arizona State. And then they have to play number 1 seed Oklahoma. So you understand how that could be difficult.
Yep.
But it was really cool. I had never been to Arizona State before. I learned that it can be a comfortable temperature at 98 degrees, believe it or not, as long as the humidity is low enough. So that's another really fun part of the job, is that you can't control the outcome of the game you're going to see, but if you're with good people, you get to go to really cool places, and I love all those aspects of the job.
Yeah, you live in Charlotte now, so you understand the humidity that we've been going through in this state for, well, since April, basically.
So moving from Ohio, the furthest south I had lived prior to this move was Dayton, Ohio. So I had grandparents lived in Virginia, and so we would come down and visit them, and I would go outside and it's July, and I'm just like, I can't stay outside in this. And now I'm really living it, where there are some days where after 10 o'clock, it's just got to wait till the sun goes down to go outside. And but from what I hear, the fall and the winter are excellent, and so I'm looking forward to what those seasons are going to be like.
I'm counting down the days until winter. I really am, because I'm looking outside now. It's funny, if you stay here long enough, you can look outside and see, yeah, it's hot. It's just really hot and miserable. And I don't know how it's been there. I'm about an hour-ish away from Charlotte. We've had the craziest storms the last week, which of course comes from humidity and all of that. But enough with the meteorology. I'm sure you're not here to talk about that. So you talk about the growth of softball. Why do you think that is? I've loved softball for a long time. It feels like it's gaining a lot of steam. I think I read something where the Oklahoma-Texas Women's College World Series final series, that's a mouthful, outrated the College World Series championship series. Why is there so much steam and momentum behind college softball?
Well, one, I think it's an emerging sport where the publicity or the availability of televised broadcasts for other sports has been ahead of softball. And so it continues to get more exposure. And as it reaches more people, I think that the audience and even the casual fan realizes what softball diehards have known for a long time, is that it's a very exciting sport, and that you've got great personalities, great athletic talent, and the dugouts are always lively and chirping, and in a friendly way, because it's to their own team to help motivate their own teammates. Their scoring happens quickly because it's a smaller field, so even a ball that bounces off the wall can turn into an inside the park home run. And I think that we realize, like, hey, there are some really dominant players in this game. Even if it's not a Power 5 player, in my regional in Tallahassee this year, we had Georgina Korick, who's one of the top pitchers in the history of college softball. And when you get to know the stories of these players, then I think you can really get immersed into it. I think that's important too, is we always talk about, from a broadcast perspective, let's humanize people before we analyze them with numbers. And so if I tell you the story of somebody, you're much more likely to remember, hey, and this player moved from overseas when she was young, and her dad was her coach, and this kind of stuff, versus saying, and this is her ERA, and this is her whip, and this is ball. But because those numbers just go in one ear and out the other, I try to save numbers for something that's really important, but want to tell a story first. And that's what I love about softball, is that it's I don't want to say it's uncharted territory, but there are a lot of players, coaches, teams who have not had their stories told. And it's an opportunity to do something like that I think makes the game and the broadcast more intriguing.
Yeah. Everyone fell in love with Jocelyn Alo. How can you not? Amazing player. One of the best we've ever seen. And Oklahoma is so dominant in the sport as well right now. And it would be nice to get some newer blood challenging them, but we are getting newer blood, especially in the ACC. Duke, Clemson, Virginia Tech, they all had great years. Duke and Virginia Tech made the super regionals. I think I have that right. Virginia Tech made the supers, I think. Duke,
they did. They hosted for the first time. Yes.
Yeah, and Duke did. And so, yeah, we're getting some new blood. The ACC network helping that out for sure, you would imagine. But yeah, it's great to see college softball taking off the way that it is. Now you brought it up. I wasn't going to ask you this, but I'm glad you brought it up. We're living in a weird place in the baseball world right now, where there is, I grew up where ERA was difficult to understand at times. Now we've got WHIP, and I can't even spew out all of them. Where are you at on the millions of statistics that we have that make no sense to me? Because I'm I'm not a math person.
Like everybody else, I find it easy to get overwhelmed or inundated by the availability of advanced statistics. And so I try and find ones that are interesting to me. Not that I've done any scientific poll on this or anything of what people want to hear, but if I understand a metric that I think will help tell the story of why a certain player is failing or succeeding, or likewise for a team, then I want to bring that to the audience. So there's a defensive statistic called ultimate zone rating, which measures you against other defenders. And so if you are a positive in that number, if you're 5.0 or whatever, or you can look at another one like defensive runs saved to show what you've brought to the table. But if you're well below the league average, I want to share that too, to say, hey, this guy he's an aging right fielder or whatever the case might be. He's 33 years old. He might hit 30 home runs, but they're playing him there at the expense of better defense. The Phillies are probably a good example of that with their outfield, with the exception of Bryce Harper. Like, they've went with guys who are Nick Castellanos is one of them. Like, not a great defender, Schwarber, not a great defender, but better hitters. And so they're making the gamble that will pay off with more runs. So when I bring an advanced statistic to the table, there's a couple of things that I want to be able to have with me that make it make sense. One is a one-line description of what that statistic is. So if it's fielding independent pitching, and I'm probably going to botch this because I don't have the definition in front of me, but it's something like fly ball strikeouts minus balls in play, something like that. Like, that takes the defense out of the equation. So we're really showing you it's not just a luck stat for a pitcher, but it's about what his performance or her performance in softball has equated to. Or if we're talking about an offensive statistic, I want to be able to explain it to you, but also give you what the league average is for that, because otherwise I think those numbers are meaningless. If I tell you a guy has a 987 OPS, well, that's great. But if the league average is 986, then it's not that good. If the league average is 500, it's amazing. Mm-hmm. So that's incumbent upon us. And I think it's been nice, thinking about Sunday Night Baseball on TV this year, I've seen that when they've highlighted a stat on somebody's lower third, when they come up to the plate, it'll also say league average. And that's important because it tells you how good or how much room for improvement there is for that player. And so that's incumbent upon us as broadcasters, is not just to throw these numbers at people and say, you have to like these new numbers now versus the ones we've always known on the back of a baseball card. But here's why this may lead to a better understanding of the game for you as the viewer.
It was an Astros and White Sox playoff game last year that ended up on MLB Network. Bob Costas was calling it. And there was a bunch on Twitter. We know how great of a place Twitter is. There was a bunch on Twitter of these guys are just talking about something that happened 70 years ago versus why are they not telling us the stats? If you ask me, I love listening to Bob Costas call a baseball game. He is one of the absolute best. And baseball is such a historical sport. It's been going on for forever. I personally like that in the game because, as you know, there's a lot of downtime in baseball. There's a lot of time to talk about something else. I love the historical aspect versus the whatever stats you want to throw at me. Do you find yourself trying to balance any of that out in your games?
Well, the beauty of broadcasting, whether it's baseball or any sport, is that everybody has a different way of doing it. And that's what makes it, I think, an interesting field, because all of the measurement of what's good is totally subjective rather than objective. If you're a lawyer and you win all your cases, great. You're going to be fabulously wealthy and you're going to be highly sought after. But I could think that I'm the greatest broadcaster in the world. But if anybody in a hiring position doesn't think that, then clearly that my opinion doesn't matter. And so when it comes to baseball, I think that someone like Bob or Sean McDonough, who did the World Series when he was in his 30s and now is doing the Stanley Cup final, I want to say Sean is 60 now, has a wealth of experience and a wealth of stories that someone like me at age 33 is just not capable of having, because I haven't called as much, I haven't been around as much. And so we're going to bring different things to the table. I'm always making sure that I'm not inundating people with numbers,
Mhm.
because like we talked about earlier, you just can only absorb so much, whether it's as a viewer or as a listener. And nobody has ever complained in watching a broadcast when the announcer has stopped talking. No one ever says that's a bad thing. And so, you're never going to make everybody happy with every broadcast. It's just not possible. And so you have to go about it and do it the best way that you think will make it the most enjoyable and informative and entertaining experience for the audience. And so for some people that might be storytelling, for others that might be a more analytical way of presenting things. Hopefully there's a good mix of in between of those things. So yes, it's important to think about the feedback you get from doing a broadcast, but also for somebody like Bob, who's one of the best to ever do it, you have to know that like his experience is a part of what makes him great, and the storytelling is going to be a really good part of the broadcast because he loves baseball and he loves the history of sports.
Real quick, major league, college, whatever, favorite place for you to call a game, whether that's baseball, basketball, or whatever.
I get asked this question a good amount, and I always tell myself that I'm going to make a list, and I have not made one yet.
Let's make it
I
right
think
here.
one of the cooler ones for me was in 2018 at Fenway. I did a game at Fenway. It was Cleveland and Boston. And my wife and I had gone earlier that summer to Boston on a quick weekend trip, and we had taken a tour of Fenway. So that was maybe June. And then in August, I was calling a game at Fenway. So for me to go from tour participant to credentialed broadcaster at Fenway and an historic venue was a really cool experience for me. Another one earlier this year was doing a game at Citi Field. So I grew up as a big Mets fan, went to Shea Stadium, not Citi Field, but just to call a game of the franchise that I grew up rooting for was really cool. So I think those two stand out at the top of mine. But yes, I will have to come up with that list at some point.
Yeah, great. I'll leave you with this. So, and I said when this podcast started just a couple of weeks ago, it's brand new. I said one of the things that's going to make this unique is having the chance for an aspiring broadcaster like me talking to people in the industry. It's just kind of a unique feature. So I want to bring this up. It says in your Twitter bio, if you're a young broadcaster or college student, I'm happy to listen to your tape. DMs are open. There's a lot of ego in this industry. There probably has to be if you're going to get on a microphone and talk to thousands, sometimes millions of people. Why do you feel the responsibility of trying to help young broadcasters? What makes you want to do that?
I suppose this all goes full circle to where we started our conversation talking about Syracuse and the community and the atmosphere of helping each other out. And that has always really just stuck with me, is that I had great contemporaries when I was in college, my classmates. We all helped each other out, and we continue to do that after graduation. We still do that today. I do that with even my friends in the industry who I didn't go to college with, who are just really close friends that I look at like brothers that I didn't have growing up. And there's a saying that I came across a long time ago. I have no idea to whom it's attributed, and perhaps it's nobody. But it was that a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. If you take a candle and light another one, the original candle still maintains its flame. And so when I was getting started in the business, 10-ish years ago, I reached out to a lot of people, and I was and remain eternally grateful to the people who were in the industry who really helped me out then. And what does it take for me but 30 minutes to listen to a half inning of somebody's baseball play-by-play? And I know how much it meant to me then to reach out to people who were true professionals. And I felt so good about hearing back from those people, even if it was ripping my work apart, which was fine because I wanted to get better, was that I felt validated just by hearing those people. And even the one positive comment that said, "Hey, keep up the good work," I was really buoyed by that. And I said, I want to be able to help other people feel that way too, because there's no one path to get where we are, but we're all trying to get better. And so if I can be in a position to help other people, I think it's important to be able to do that.
Well, just like Tom Hart and John Forsland, they've come on this podcast. You're the third on the podcast. I want to thank you for doing it because not everybody is willing to help out. And they don't have to. That's not, a dig at them. it's not their responsibility to help out the young broadcasters that are trying to get up, but it's nice to see people that will take that responsibility like yourself. So I thank you so much for joining today and talking with me, and hopefully we'll talk down the road because this was a lot of fun, and I appreciate what you do for the young broadcasters such as myself.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And there's another phrase that just popped into my head as well. Is be who you needed when you were younger. And so I always think about that as I people who I looked up to and I reached out to. It's weird for me to think because I still think of myself as the 21-year-old kid just getting out of college. But now I realize that I'm in a position where younger people are watching the work that I do, and so I think it's important to provide a positive role model for people and to be the person that I needed when I was younger.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and hope to talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Mike Couzens on the Behind the Mic podcast. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mike Couzens of ESPN. It really was a fun conversation. Again, like I said at the top, Mike has done a lot already, but he's still so young, still in his 30s. He's got a long career left ahead of him, big things coming for him. You certainly get the feeling, you certainly hope that a lot of big things are coming his way. He's very good to listen to. He's very fun to listen to, call a game, basketball game, baseball, whatever. It was also fun to talk to as well. Really enjoy the conversation about going to Syracuse and all the people that have gone to Syracuse. And as I said off the top, baseball is kind of in a weird place. There's people that's just not interested in baseball the way they were 30 years ago, 20 years ago, you could even say 10 years ago, and they're still struggling to gain a younger fan base. And just from what I've observed on social media, I think a lot of people would really enjoy having younger announcers. That's been another conversation topic on social media around baseball. Are people finally ready to get into the newer era of announcers? Bob Costas is an absolute legend, but there are a group of people, as we talked about, that don't want to hear Bob Costas tell the stories that he does from decades gone by. Bob Costas is great. I love hearing him call a baseball game any chance that I get. But there has to be something said for that group of people, and it's a pretty large group of people on social media and watching baseball that want to hear 20 and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds even get in and fresh voices for the game, fresh opinions of the game. Obviously, Fox has their guy, and it's a young guy as well, and Joe Davis taking over for Joe Buck since Joe Buck's moved to ESPN, and Joe Davis is going to be around for a long, long time. There's zero doubt about that. So, baseball fans, I hope you like him, and you should like him because he's tremendous. But he's going to be around for a long time, calling all-star games and NLCSs, ALCSs, and of course World Series at Fox. And of course, if you're a Dodgers fan and you watch Dodger games on a regular basis, then you know about Joe Davis and how great he is. And there are other young announcers getting into it now with Mike Couzens. You've got Adam Amin, and he can call the heck out of a baseball game as well. So there are young announcers that are getting into the game. You're hearing on a more regular basis. So I hope baseball fans can appreciate what the announcers like Bob Costas can bring that's been around the game for so long, and also the younger announcers too. You can add Brian Anderson, even though he's been around for quite a while now with the Brewers and with TBS for that matter, but he's now getting a great spot every year in the playoffs with TBS. He's doing more national games with them on the Tuesday night package. And I hope fans can appreciate the older generation of broadcaster in baseball and what they bring, and what the newer generation of broadcasters can bring to the game of baseball, because it's such a tough sport to call. There's no doubt about that. There's down moments where you have to have the stories, and we talked with Mike about having a million statistics at your hands. what to use, what not to use, how many is good enough to use, and then how much is too much. Baseball is a very difficult game to call. It always has been, just from that perspective of it, but also it's such a beautiful game to call, and you can make it your own more than really any other sport, no doubt. So, hope you enjoyed the podcast today with Mike Couzens. Thank him so much for joining us. Can't wait to hear him more on baseball and then into college basketball season as well. So, hope you enjoyed it, and hope you'll come back next Friday for a brand new episode of the Behind the Mic podcast. So long, everyone.